Hello, and welcome to our lesson on rectangular arrays. First, let's talk about some important vocabulary words you will need to know for today. Rectangular array, an arrangement of objects in rows and columns that form a rectangle. All rows have the same number of objects, and all columns have the same number of objects, just like this array of apples. Number model. A number sentence, expression, or other representation that models a number story or a situation. For example, a number model for this array would look like 3 times 4 equals 12. You notice that a number model has a symbol that tells you what operation you're doing and an equal sign that tells you what the answer is. The turnaround rule. This is a property of multiplication where two numbers can be multiplied in either order without changing the product. Remember, the product is the answer to a multiplication problem. For example, using our problem from above, 3 times 4 equals 12, and using the turnaround rule, 4 times 3 also equals 12. Our final vocabulary word for today is factor. A factor is any two numbers that can be multiplied together to create a product. For example, factors of 12 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. You can multiply some of these numbers together to create the number 12. For example, 1 times 12 is 12, 2 times 6 is 12, and 3 times 4 is 12. By 5th grade, you should have been introduced to the idea of using arrays to help you solve multiplication problems. However, if you have not, here are some samples of arrays. You will notice that each row of each array has the same number of objects. These rows have 5, these rows have 3, and these rows all have 4. You will also notice that each column has the same number of objects. All of these columns have 3, these columns have 2, and these columns have 4. Each array is rectangular in shape. What number sentence does each array represent? This first array represents 3 times 5, which equals 15. The second smaller array represents 2 times 3, which equals 6. Finally, the array at the bottom represents 4 times 4, which equals 16. Can you use the turnaround rule on any of these problems and still get the same answer? If you answered yes, you are absolutely right. The turnaround rule on this first array looks like 5 times 3, which still equals 15. The turnaround rule for this small array is 3 times 2 equals 6. The turnaround rule for our final array is 4 times 4 equals 16. This one doesn't look any different because in this one the rows and columns are the same size. Sometimes in math you will be given a number and asked to find all possible arrays that go with that number. This means that they want you to find all of the possible factors of a number. I have provided you with a number properties checklist to use to make this process easier. Please reference it with me while we find all of the factors for the number 20. First, because the number 20 is a whole number, we know that 1 is definitely a factor. Next, we're going to think about the number 2. Any number that is an even number is divisible by 2, which means the same thing as saying that 2 is a factor. Is 20 an even number? It is. So because 20 is an even number, 2 is also a factor. Next, we have to think about finding the digital root for a number. The digital root of a number is where you use the digits and add them together to find their sum. In this case, 2 plus 0 equals 2. So the digital root of this number is 2. Since the digital root is 2, we know that 3 is not a factor of 20. Next, we are going to move on to the number 4. As you can see on your paper, the rule for 4 is that any number that ends with a double zero is divisible by 4. However, this number does not end with a double zero, but we still know that 4 is a factor. If I were to count by 4s, I would land exactly at 20. Next, we're going to talk about the number 5. Any number that ends with a 0 or a 5 is divisible by 5. That means that 5 is a factor of 20 because 20 ends with a 0. Next, we have the number 6. 6 is not a factor of 20 because both 2 and 3 are not factors, only 2. 7 is next. If you know your 7's facts or you know how to count by 7's, you know that 7 times 3 is 21, which is very, very close to 20, but isn't exactly 20, so 7 is not a factor. Use that same idea with the number 8. 8 times 3 is 24, and 8 times 2 is 16. Neither one of those answers is 20, so 8 cannot be a factor of 20. The next number is 9. Because our digital root is 2, we know that 9 is not a factor. In order for 9 to be a factor of a number, your digital root has to be either 3, 6, or 9. Our next number is 10. Any number that ends with a 0 is divisible by 10, so we know that 10 is a factor of 20. 11 is our next number, and if we know our 11's facts, we know that 11 times 2 is 22, and 11 times 1 is 11. Since neither one of those answers is 20, 11 is not a factor of 20. Finally, let's look at the number 12. We know that a number has to be divisible by both 3 and 4 in order for it to be divisible by 12. Since this number is only divisible by 4 and not 3, we know that 12 is not a factor. Finally, we're going to add 20 to our list. Because we know that 20 definitely goes into 20 an even number of times with no remainders. Now let's check our list of factors and make sure that we have all possible factors so we can create our arrays. 1 times 20 is 20, 2 times 10 is 20, and 4 times 5 is 20. Nobody is left over by itself, so I know that I have all possible factors of 20. Now let's make our arrays. The first array that I am going to make is going to be the one that represents 1 times 20, or 20 times 1. If you wanted to take a moment to count all of my little dots in this line, you could, but I can assure you there are 20. This array represents one row of 20 dots, which equals 20. Now let's make our next array. This row of dots is also 20 dots long. This array represents 20 times 1, which equals, you guessed it, 20. Here is our next array. This array has 2 rows of 10 dots, which equals 20 dots total. Our fourth array looks like this. This array represents 10 rows of 2 dots each, which equals 20. Here is our fifth array. This array represents 5 rows of 4 dots each. 5 times 4 equals 20. Here is our final array. This array has a total of 4 rows with 5 dots each. 4 times 5 equals 20. These are all possible arrays using the turnaround rule that could be found for the number 20. Here is your practice problem of the day. Use your number properties checklist to find all possible factors and arrays for the number 28, which, by the way, is ridiculously small, and I know that, but for some reason this app would not let me make it bigger today. Good luck!